In this video, I'm going to show you how to score daffodil bulbs. So this time of year, it's a great time of year to buy daffodils because usually they've flowered already in the pots at the grocery stores, and so they try to sell them off fairly cheaply just to recoup whatever investment they had in it. So first you want to just kind of grab your daffodil bulbs out from whatever pot you have and try to get off as much soil as possible. And then you want to do this little bleach junk that I mentioned in the pre-lab. So I usually just use like a gallon of water and a cap full of bleach. And just kind of rinse them off a little bit in there, and that's just going to kind of help kill off any bacteria or fungal spores that are on the outside of there. And now we have these fresh daffodil bulbs that are nice and clean. The next thing we want to do with them is we want to trim off the tops and the roots because we just want to make more bulbs. We don't really care about photosynthetic capacity anymore, and it's not going to really need to be absorbing anything from its roots. So to do that, we're just going to take a pair of clippers, and you want to kind of go a little bit above the neck, you know, not too high, and just clip that off like that, and then we're just going to trim these roots and cut that off so that we end up with just a little bulb like that, okay? And so we'll do that with a bunch of these. You can peel off the outer layer of scales if you want to. It's not necessary. Sometimes there'll be other pathogens that are hiding underneath there, so it's a good idea to take them off. Sometimes you want to protect this interior from rotting, and so it's a good time to, it's good to keep it on. I don't really know either way. I've not really seen too much of a difference in propagation. So the method that we're going to use to propagate these today is called bulb scoring. And what we want to do is we want to make a cut across this basal plate. So just to remind you, here is what the plant looked like before. Oh, it's not going to focus on it. And down here is this basal plate, and you can see how it's like kind of a dome shape. So what that means is when we cut, we want to cut at an angle so that we are going to cut more into the basal plate, more into the basal plate than in the side scales. So we're going to take this box cutter and we're going to just, let's see here, the best way to do this. We're going to push down in the center, and you'll feel resistance until you don't. The resistance is the basal plate, and when you don't feel it anymore, it means that you've made it into the leafy portion of the plant, okay? So then I'm going to end up with something like this, where I've got 4 little pieces, and I'm going to just press on the outside there a little bit so that it squishes it open a little bit, and that's where we expect our new little bulblets to form are going to be in this cut. So these are plants here that are fresh that I've just dug up. This is one that's hardened off. I dug this up probably 6 months ago anyway. And again, we're going to need to take the shoot off the top. You can probably even just break it off like that, and that's fine. And we're going to do our cut through our basal plate again. A lot of times people will show you to do 6 for your finger's sake and stuff. I think 4 is probably okay for our intents and purposes. Okay, so then we're just going to kind of split that open. And I can tell you that the hardened off one definitely has more resistance when you're trying to cut it, probably just because it has been hardened off. So then we take these plants and we plant them out into a flat, all these little bulbs, which I've done for you here. This was our peat moss flat, so the peat moss is nice and moist in here, so I'm not going to have to water anything else. And I've labeled them, so I've got my fresh bulbs on one side and my hardened off bulbs on the other. And you can see that we've scored all of them 4 times. There are 25 bulbs on each side. And then I'm going to take this plant flat and stick it inside of a Mylar bag to keep it in the dark and to keep it humid. And then I'm just going to leave it underneath my bench back here and check on it every once in a while, and we'll see by the end of the quarter if we end up with new bulblet formation. A lot of things that I've read say that it takes between 3 and 6 weeks to start forming the little bulblets. In previous years, last year we did see a little bit of bulblet formation start to happen by the end of the quarter, but This is one of those experiments that kind of needs a little bit more time than what we have in a 10-week period. So if you do have more time that you can let this sit at your own home, then go ahead and give it more time. You want to make sure that your peat moss is really wet now, because we don't want to add any more water to these now that they have fresh wounds. You want that to kind of heal over for a couple of days before you would want to add any more moisture to this flat. But realistically, since we're keeping it within that Mylar bag, I don't know that we're really going to need to add much to this, since the peat moss has such great water holding capacity. But I'll still check on it once a week. The bulblets that form from these are probably not going to flower next year, and that's one of the reasons why bulbs are so expensive. This is like a 2 or 3 year project to get from something that gives you a lot more bulbs to something that's actually going to produce a flower for you. So we'll plant these out, the little bulblets, and let them grow up for a year and just kind of plant them in place. A lot of these end up being nice borders, or we do a lot of bulby things where you just kind of plant it and forget about it and let it do its own thing until you notice that they aren't performing anymore, which is typically an indicator that you need to do something like this to propagate them or split them apart. Sometimes you'll end up with a bulb that's like this one. This is already starting to form its own offset. So I'm just going to rinse this really fast, and then I'm going to show you how to split this, just as a kind of your own FYI sort of thing. Okay, so now we can take a look at this bulb, and it's trying to form these little offsets just like we're trying to make by damaging that basal plate. This plant is already trying to do that by itself, to propagate itself that way. So this is an evolutionarily successful strategy for this plant to try to grow more of itself. So here I've just kind of peeled a few things off, and you can see that this peels off a lot like a garlic. We're going to end up with a little bit of that basal plate on the bottom of this one. And these could be planted out as individual daffodil bulbs for next year. These probably will flower next year, maybe, I don't know. A lot of times it's either 2 or 3 years, and look at that. So I'm just kind of pulling this apart. Each one is ending up with its own little basal thing. Oh, it looks like I've probably got one more. You can usually tell how many you have available in one little bulb set like this by the number of shoots that are coming out from this apice. And I can see that there's one more shoot coming over here on the side. So if I can peel off another layer of scales, maybe we can get to that one too. Oh, yep, look at that. And then it just kind of peels off another piece with a little bit of that basal plate. All right, so this peeled off very much like a garlic. This was just a bulb that we left alone for too long. And so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I have 6 plants here out of just this one bulb. This would have been too much crowding for this bulb and would have made it so that it would stop flowering. But now that we've divided it again, this main stalk will flower, and all of these little offsets will flower within a year or two.